welcome. It's so wonderful to have you here this afternoon. My name is Sarah Egan. My pronouns are she, her, hers, and I'm the Associate Curator of Education at the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum. And I'm thrilled to have this opportunity to share with you more about our partnership with Boston Public Schools and the impact of our program called Thinking Through Art. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. So for those of you that might not have been to the museum in person before, I'm going to start with just a brief introduction to the Gardner Museum itself. Then I'm going to talk about this program, Thinking Through Art, where we try to empower teachers with strategies that are going to work for all the students in all of the different types of classrooms that exist in Boston Public Schools. We'll get to have our own discussion about a work of art, which is the most fun part of all. And then I'll take you through some of the findings of a study that we conducted last school year, looking at the impact of thinking through art on teachers and students. Certainly there's going to be opportunities for questions, but you can pause me at any moment if you want me to clarify something or elaborate. So the Gardner Museum was opened in 1903, and it's all the vision of one woman, Isabella Stewart Gardner, who we can see here on the left. She collected art from around the world and brought it here to Boston, creating a museum that has this courtyard here as, we like to say, the heart and lungs of the museum. Those flowers are real, they change with the seasons. So every time you come to the Gardner Museum, it's like walking into an oasis. Isabella Gardner arranged her collection in the galleries in a way that was very personal to her. She did not follow standard conventions of museums of having a whole room devoted to a certain part of the world or time period or artist, but rather combined different types of artwork, different eras, and different cultures all together. And then when she passed away in 1924, said that we could never change these arrangements. So what we see in the galleries really is her vision left intact. And here we can see another view of Gardner painted by her friend John Singer Sargent. She also said in 1924, as part of that will, that the museum should be open for the education and enjoyment of the public forever. So education has always been key to the mission of the Gardner Museum. And working with Boston Public Schools has always been a way that we've expressed that mission. Currently, we're working in this model called Thinking Through Art. And here I do want to shout out to some of our sponsors that make all of this possible, especially Vertex, the foundation, which is our lead sponsor in this work. They are so dedicated to allowing connections between the museum and the students to flourish and to supporting this research as well. So Thinking Through Art is the way that we work with Boston Public Schools since 2017. And we've worked with over 300 teachers and over 18,000 students in more than 75% of Boston Public Schools since that time. We really take the approach that teachers are the levers of change, that if we can affect the way that a teacher is using instructional practices in their classroom, then that can affect generations of students. And so we really invest in the teachers in order to affect student outcomes and to make sure that all the students of Boston have student-centered learning, visual art, and connections with community resources like the Gardner as part of their experience. Some of our goals for the program are that teachers will be able to improve their culturally sustaining instruction, facilitate discussions about works of art that are putting students at the center, and know what's available at the Gardner Museum that can be a resource both professionally for their students in their classrooms, but also personally as a place to recharge, refresh, and reinvigorate their love of the arts or of plants or whatever they might find solace in that moment. Our hopes for students are that they can increase critical thinking skills to prepare for college and career readiness and develop social emotional learning, as well as see the Gardner as not just a resource, but a place where they really belong, that it is their museum. And we do all of this through a series of components. First, we have really intensive professional development for teachers. They spend a week with us in the summer in an August Summer Institute. Then we reconvene in the fall and again in the spring. We train them, the majority of our time together is training them in visual thinking strategies, which I'll talk more about in a few moments, but essentially it's a student-centered pedagogy. We also give teachers a digital art curriculum. So these are slides of images of art from around the world, from every different era, so that teachers can use them in their classrooms more or less monthly and introduce students to the diversity of artwork that exists in the world and from all different eras. And we try to give both opportunities for students to see themselves reflected. That's what this idea of a mirror is, as well as windows into different kinds of cultures, different world views. So representing artwork from different eras and different parts of the world as well, with the idea that those can be transformed into, as the metaphor goes, the sliding glass doors, that students can open up those windows and enter right into them. The part that teachers are usually most excited about is the 2 free visits to the Gardner Museum. We cover all the costs, including buses, and this is a chance for the students to be guided by our museum teachers through the galleries, using visual thinking strategies and other student-centered techniques to really find what sparks interest for them and follow their own lines of inquiry throughout the galleries. We also give teachers and students access to the museum through family admission passes. So all of our participating teachers and students and their families can come anytime that they want to for free to the Gardner. They have 4 free admission passes that they can use all year and through the summer. Again, we want this to be a place where they can be the tour guide. They can show their family what they discussed with their class and really make it their own. You can see in the pictures here, some of these objects are from the collection at the Gardner Museum, and others are from other collections around the world that we've integrated into the curriculum that we give teachers to use in their classrooms. Mariana, I just want to check in. Did you hear what I was saying? You were on the other side. Got it. Beautiful. So what is visual thinking strategies? What is this pedagogy? It's a technique to lead a conversation about a work of art that is very open-ended and follows where the students want to go, with a facilitator that is using very specific techniques in their instruction. It's used right now across the world in museums, in schools, in business settings, in medical education settings. And across all of these different environments, it supports critical thinking skills. That's been established through studies both at the Gardner as well as elsewhere. But it's also really fun. It's a way for people without any art viewing experience or art making experience to find their way into engaging with works of art. They find that they have something to say about an artwork. So it makes it easier for people to enjoy museums and works of art. And it really works beautifully at the Gardner because our collection does not have labels describing what each artwork is. And Isabella Stewart Gardner did not write down why she put things together. So the Gardner is a truly open-ended question that we can all come up with our own answers to. And so we invite students to do just that. I want to share some of what you could expect as the impact of thinking through art if you were to participate in this program and do these types of conversations with your students over the course of a year. As I said, last year we collected data from students in Boston Public Schools. We had about 55 classrooms, and we were really asking the question of how well is this program achieving strategic goals in Boston Public Schools that are contributing to equitable literacy, right? So culturally responsive instruction, social emotional learning, and critical thinking are all things that are very important to us at the Gardner and very important to Boston Public Schools. So where's that Venn diagram? We designed this study. This is the first time that this teaching technique of visual thinking strategies has really been researched in terms of social emotional learning, to my knowledge. But it's something that anecdotally was coming up year after year after year, that we saw the way that this program was really supporting the whole child. So we wanted to understand more of how that was working. We, as I said, brought together 55 classrooms, 700 students, and they represent Boston demographics pretty well. It's across the board of pre-K through, or K0 through 12th grade. We've got equivalent to Boston Public School representation of students of color, students with disabilities, lots of different types of classes represented here. And as I started to say, we were comparing the students that are in Thinking Through Art with a control group. So a group of really skilled teachers who did not participate in Thinking Through Art at all, did not get trained by us, did not come to the museum, but were very generous in letting us come into their classroom to collect data. And we compared at the beginning and end of the school year. And what we were looking for teachers when we're thinking about culturally responsive instruction, we adapted the CRIAP tool to look for things that we thought might be present in a group discussion about art. So things like relationships that have caring and respect as their foundation, instructional practices that prioritized equity, centering students' lived and learned experiences, and really acknowledging and valuing that fund of knowledge that they're bringing to the school, and having discourse where we were stopping assumptions or stopping biases, interrogating assumptions, and really encouraging diversity of perspectives. For students in the social emotional realm, we're looking at self-awareness and confidence as a learner. We're looking for relationship skills across the classroom, the expression of empathy, either to the characters in the picture or to classmates in the room. Respecting, you'll see multiple perspectives come up quite a bit, respecting multiple perspectives, and participating in what we're calling a community of learners, which is really that each of them recognize that they are interdependent, that they value the contributions of the other learners in the classroom, and respectfully are working together towards making real meaning from the work of art, that the conversation has meat and heft, and that it's because they're all building together. In terms of critical thinking, there's some skills that are a little bit more basic, like identifying information, making associations, drawing inferences. We were looking at whether those inferences were or were not supported by evidence as well. Again, considering multiple perspectives, as you all experienced, we have lots of perspectives that come out in these conversations. And then another kind of holistic category here is reasoning. How much are they taking those other types of critical thinking, synthesizing them all, and able to come up with the reasoning that connects that claim and the evidence? So what do we find? Hurrah! We have incredible findings that thinking through art increases all of these three categories of skills that we're really looking for: culturally responsive instruction, social emotional learning, and then specifically these higher order critical thinking skills of constructing meaning and reasoning. These are the categories that were really statistically significant. So I'm going to walk through them a little bit one by one. In terms of teachers, 95% of thinking through art teachers at the end of the school year had what we called a high culturally responsive instruction score. So we videotaped teachers in the classroom and then had an instrument where we were scoring them similar to the CRIAP. And then we like created a line and like anything above this is high, other things below it are low. 95% of the teachers are high. And their growth in culturally responsive discourse was nearly 10 times that of the control group. So everyone started off pretty much at the same level of excellence, the control group and the thinking through art teachers. The teachers went through intensive professional development with us and increased their ability to be student-centered, increased their ability to be culturally responsive. And then we collected that pre-data at the beginning of the school year. So it was actually remarkable to me to see that they grew over 20% from the beginning of the year to the end of the year after having had that really intensive professional development. They continue to grow and advance. Whereas the control group scores rose about 5%, which is what I would expect, that as veteran teachers, year over year, you're getting 5% or so better. So to see this 20% growth with the thinking through art teachers, I think is really it's statistically significant and really substantial in terms of how we think about teacher practice. So this is exciting to me. Also that the teachers are using words like joy, meaningful, discovery when they're describing the program. I always think about how we, in some ways with this program, we're trying to give teachers the opportunity to reconnect with the teacher they want to be. We're giving them some freedom and some flexibility, but as you'll see in a moment, they're still having incredible student outcomes. So 84% of the students in thinking through art increase their social emotional learning. We're really seeing that the teacher gains are the student gains. That the teachers who did the program and met or exceeded our expectations in terms of all the different program components, they had even stronger gains for the students. So we're seeing that here with the social emotional learning. When we look at the differences, again, between thinking through art students and the control counterparts, this again is statistically significant, where 52%, I'm sorry, I'm throwing a lot of numbers at you, but 52% of the thinking through art classes scores were in that like really high range, but only 6% of the control group. So we're seeing that across environments from the museum to the classroom, whether they're looking at, we had two different images, some were looking at a painting, some were looking at a piece of photojournalism, that these findings were stable across these different environments, which tells us that because of thinking through art, the students have really increased their ability across different settings to demonstrate social emotional learning. We're going to look at a couple different categories of social emotional learning in more depth, because I think that's where we're really excited about these findings. So the students' self-confidence, that they have something to contribute to the discussion in their classroom, in the Thinking Through Art groups, grew 34%. And then you'll see this slide essentially replicated. So the pink here is the percentage growth for Thinking Through Art. The control group is here in white. We saw this and many of the other types of social emotional learning. The youngest students grew the most also. We saw gains across the board in confidence, but the most among the students, and that was things like raising their hand, body language, gaze, verbal and nonverbal cues. In terms of relationship skills, you can see here that Thinking Through Art students grew 36%, whereas the control group grew 12%. And I think that this quote like really sums that up, that Thinking Through Art is contributing to a classroom culture where the students are calling each other by name, where the teacher is using students' names, right? And how important that is to know who your community of learners is in that group. Respect for multiple perspectives was a huge growth for Thinking Through Art. This 40% is about 7 times, more than the control group growth of 6%. And one component of the multiple perspectives that we were looking at was curiosity. We found that the Thinking Through Art students grew more curious as the year went on. When they were shown the same image to respond to at the end of the year than the beginning of the year, that they were looking at the beginning of the year, they like dug in. They were like, ooh, what more can we find here? Whereas the control group might have had a mindset of, oh, I've already seen this before. What more could I possibly add? So when we think about students being able to persist, this sense of like grit and curiosity that's going to be self-directed learning and really intrinsic motivation, I think there's a lot to be said of how Thinking Through Art is able to prime the students for that kind of lifelong learner success. When we then think about this holistic category of a community of learners, again, where students are all working together, learning is a social endeavor, everyone's benefiting collectively, that's where we're seeing the most growth in Thinking Through Art of all the different categories. So by the end of the year, 66% of the classes had either exemplary or accomplished community of learner scores on our rubric. And again, the outcomes here were the strongest for the youngest students. So the Thinking Through Art students in grades pre-K to second grade increased that score by 81%. And you might think, well, that's still developmentally appropriate. These little ones, they're learning how to see that there are other people in a classroom besides themselves. But the control group only increased 8%. So we're really seeing that because they have this opportunity in Thinking Through Art to share their perspectives, to see like, oh, now I understand how the person next to me sees the world a little bit more, that it's really opening up their minds and opening up their understanding of what their peers can contribute to their own learning. We're seeing even 4th grade students citing each other in their individual responses of, I think this because I remember when Sam said that, and now I am changing my mind, right? So they're really noticing how the group learning is more powerful than just one individual looking at a work of art. And then when we look at critical thinking, again, I'm going to hone in on these two types of critical thinking that both were the ones that were statistically significant, but also are the ones that are most crucial for Boston Public Schools, right? And in both of these cases, the control group actually decreased over the course of the year, whereas the thinking through art students went up substantially. So this is a really low stakes way to teach skills like giving evidence to support your interpretations and doing that type of reasoning that then could show up on places like MCAS or the AP tests. So these holistic, really rigorous types of critical thinking became much stronger throughout the year. Okay, so that's what we found. I'd love to kind of take a pause. I've thrown a lot of information at you. What's meaningful here for you? What's the relationship between what you're hearing me talk about and the things that you're working on your school improvement plans or in your own classroom or in your department? How does this resonate?
I love the social and emotional learning increases and that whole piece, because that is something that with our new world language standards that came out in 2021, it's embedded in there. And I think it's just so clear that using art and using these techniques is so beneficial, but also that the students have increased that aspect of their, that shows such a large increase. At first I thought, I think you answered the question, but at first I thought, isn't it interesting that the elementary schools had such a steep learning curve or change versus the older kids? And at first when I was hearing that, I'm thinking, well, maybe the older kids don't want to really say so much, or it's harder to get the data. But then I think you said, Sarah, that it's just that age group with the minds open like a sponge, and that the kids are just, this is the first time they've learned this way, and they just really soaked it up.
Right. Right. I think they're
at that age.
They're learning how to do school, right? They're learning what it looks like, and they're open to. That's also the age where teachers are explicitly teaching social emotional learning more so than the later grades. But then again, you would expect all of the pre-K to 2 classes to have really high growth in that area. But we're not seeing that in the control group. So this might be a way to get at it a little bit indirectly, but in a way that's going to stick with students. I think that also, one aspect that I didn't share too much about, we had a cohort of teachers that were all from the same school that were in those lower grades. And I think that them being able to support each other through the course of the school year also benefited the students at the end of the day. The teachers are a community of learners, and therefore the students are able to build on that social emotional learning. So I think there's great benefits to teachers doing this with a group of colleagues from their same school.
And I mean, we find the number one factor in student success is the teacher in front of the classroom. I mean, that's the number one, component of students doing well, is that person who is teaching them is everything. So that's really good to hear. Yeah.
Call me biased, Mariana, but I would say the teachers are the most important people in our country, perhaps.
How about that?
Wonderful, thank you.
And I mean, these are definitely district-wide goals. Everybody has to do their best to embed this into their instruction and into the curriculum. We've changed our whole curriculum to include these skills. So that's definitely a district-wide goal for us. And I think it's fantastic that we're seeing these results.
Yeah, so my
and so many students, I can't get over how many. 18,000?
Wow. So the very last thing that I'll leave us on is how to get involved, how to join the Gardner community, because we would love to work with you and with more teachers, and please pass this along to your colleagues. We're going to have a series of 3 mornings at the Gardner Museum where yes, you'll learn about the program, but it's really about taking care of you as a human being. So we'll have things like mindfulness activities in the galleries. We'll have calming herbal tea in our studio. We'll have a giveaway. It's really a chance to like express our appreciation for the hardworking Boston Public School teachers. And that's offered in conjunction with Boston Teachers Union. So those dates are April 27th, May 18th, and June 1st from 9 to 11 a.m. And I can send the RSVP link for that. We're also going to have an event at the Gardner really focusing on this study and celebrating the findings. So we'd love to have folks join us for that on May 23rd at 6 p.m. And then the QR code here is to sign up for Thinking Through Art to join us for next school year. So we're looking for teachers, again, of all grade levels, all subject areas. You do not need to have any experience with art at all. But if you love art like you do, Mariana, you are especially welcome to join us for next school year. So we start with a Summer Institute in August and then go through the rest of the year. And you can earn PDPs or graduate credits for participating. That's another perk that I didn't mention yet. For joining me. Thank you for talking about
Thank
art
you.
with me
Thank
and
you
for
for
all of
having
your
us.
wonderful questions and insights.